Alright, I'm David Tiganilla, and I'm doing Chapter 3, which is called The Wars of Religion. Now, there are four major characters in this chapter. The first is the prosecution, so the side of the habitants. Then is the defendant, which is the side of les insectes. The prosecution is really quite, well, accusatory, unsurprisingly, and really quite irrational, while the defendant is very much rational and logical thinking. Now, the defendant's name is Bartholomew Chassanet, and he apparently made his name before the ecclesiastical court of a town called Autun, defending rats, which were charged with destroying a crop of barley. Third character is the judge, or the procureur episcopal, and forgive my pronunciation. But the last characters are the insects themselves, which are significant in that they don't actually have a voice, but are just acted upon. This chapter is set in the city of Besançon in 1520. At this time, the city was in between the Holy Roman Empire and France, and both were experiencing major religious strife. At the time, this city was majority Catholic. Now, the main conflict of the story was that the persecutors want the woodworms excommunicated from the church and damned to eternal torment. Meanwhile, the defendant wants the innocent animals to be acquitted for their crime of their own nature, in essence, eating wood with no regard for human affairs. This means that the chapter is sort of a man versus nature conflict happening, with the defendant representing nature, literally and figuratively. Now, for a quick plot summary, the story opens up with the translator of this document, this court transcript, explaining the significance of the character of the defendant. The translated document is then presented. The persecutor then explains that this one very important bishop visited the church, and he tried to sit on a holy throne. However, woodworms ate through the wooden leg, and the chair broke when he sat on it. This collapse caused the bishop to hit his head, at which the bishop became imbecilic due to head trauma. In essence, he got major brain damage. Now, the prosecutor argued that the woodworms are evil and sent by the devil, and the defense retorts that, explaining that you can't excommunicate something that hasn't taken communion, nor damn something that doesn't even have an immortal soul. Now, the prosecutor then says that woodworms should only eat normal wood, not cut wood, believing that the woodworm mustn't have been on the ark, which is contrary to what we learned in Chapter 1, and believing the woodworms to be spontaneously generated after the flood by evil forces. Now, the defendant then replies saying that woodworms only live a couple of seasons, so the woodworms that caused the damage weren't even still alive, so it's immoral to prosecute innocent creatures. He also says that if God had not intended them to eat cut wood, then he would not have given them the will to do so. Finally, the judge arrives at deliberation, that the woodworms be declared innocent and acquitted, but banished from the physical church, and sent out to an old abandoned farm in the country. The main theme of this chapter I found to be was reason versus fear. It's absolutely ridiculous to think that an insect with no complex nervous system is capable of planning a multi-generational assassination attempt on a human religious figure. However, fearing that which we cannot understand, the woodworms are tried and proposed to be damned eternally. The very fact that this trial was going on in the first place shows the reality of that the world is really fear-driven. And the bureaucratic nature of this trial shows how difficult it is to overcome the fear that society has. And the severity of the justice proposed shows that there are major consequences if fear is allowed to win. One motif that's present throughout the book that appears in this chapter is that of the ark. It is mentioned as a sort of test whether an animal is good or not. In essence, if the animal was on the ark, it was good. If not, then the animal was not sent from God. This reinforces the theme in that speculation as to whether an animal was on the ark or not really in all honesty, it is a debate between fear and reason. And also the woodworms themselves are a motif. They represent the real-life consequences of the dichotomy between fear and reason. Now, the point of view of this chapter. So, being a court transcript, this chapter's point of view is from an uninvolved observer to this debate. However, it must be noted that the woodworm's point of view is not mentioned, with the humans assuming that the woodworms are fully dumb insects. Now, the name of this chapter, The Wars of Religion, is a reference to the events that shook France about 40 years after the events in this chapter. Long story short, during this time, the Christians sort of forgot the whole thou shalt not kill thing, and the Protestants and Catholics massacred each other with wild abandon. These massacres occurred all over modern-day Germany and France. For instance, parts of northern Germany had up to half its population killed. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, which happened in France, ended with the killing of about 30,000 people over a span of just 2 days. This shows that during this time period the chapter's in, religious tensions were high and accusations of heresy and evil were commonplace. And the trial of animals, as ridiculous as it seems, actually did happen. For instance, in 1474, a rooster was put on trial for the heinous and unnatural crime of laying an egg, and it was beheaded for it. Often, actually, pigs were tried for bizarre satanic rituals, and much like in our chapter, insects were often were tried for damage they cause against churches. Now, in terms of connections to other chapters, in this chapter, the woodworms are portrayed as a victim rather than a self-aware creature with its own agenda, as chapter 1 paints it out to be. This chapter also frequently mentions the Ark, with the persecution incorrectly believing that the woodworms were not on the Ark. This chapter has very little to do with the other chapters, including in terms of writing style, but in general, this shows the ubiquity of the woodworms to the story. One element of postmodernism is black humor, and during this time period, life was nasty, brutish, and short. The average peasant was poor, and famine was widespread. However, the church was filthy rich and corrupt. Prostitutes were actually once common in the Vatican, and the Pope was a political position held by competing wealthy families like the Borgias. It was possible to get away with heinous crimes such as rape and murder simply by paying the church a papal indulgence. Rather than spending its money on the poor and downtrodden, the church is wasting its time with frivolous trials against creatures that cannot fight back nor even commit crime in the traditional sense. From a modern perspective, with the distance of time, this is all very silly and morbid, and the author paints the chapter thusly. Now, as evidenced by the translator's note, this is a textbook example of historiographic metafiction, which is another characteristic of postmodernism. The author is writing about someone writing about something that could have happened, and he does this to make the story more believable. Another main theme of postmodernism is paranoia. Now, in the Pétition des Habitants, at the end of a long run-on sentence, the prosecutors called the woodworms hateful and intolerable malefactors. Now, the inhabitants of the diocese of Besançon honestly believe that the babies, or larvae, of various types of beetles are out to get them, and are evil. Human babies are considered by the Catholic Church to be free of sin, and human babies are by several orders of magnitude more cunning than even the smartest beetle. The author uses paranoia ironically, as the woodworms in the story are actually sentient and scheming with their own desires, and he uses this to portray humans as kind of stupid and strung along by fate. Now, I also have my 5 Harkness questions here. If you want to look at them, pause the video now. Alright, moving on then. And this concludes chapter 3. So, long story short, the main theme of this chapter is how painful and bureaucratic the internal debate between reason and fear can be.